So, Mark, thank you so much for joining us at Infamous Horror today. So, what can you tell us about your upcoming projects that you have?
I have got a few things coming up in January. So I'm an actor, but I'm also a screenwriter and a director. But the on the acting front, I've got three films coming out in the new year. I've got a film called Lift, which is a Kevin Hart movie coming out on Netflix on the 6th of January. That's a kind of an action comedy. It's kind of a mid-air heist movie. It's a big high concept production in which I play a fighter pilot. So I'm playing one of the pilots trying to bring this aircraft to the ground when it's threatening to blow it up, and all kinds of dramatic stuff is happening. That was a lot of fun to do. On the 12th of January, there's a film called One More Shot coming out, which is a Scott Adkins action movie. It's a sequel to One Shot, which came out a few years ago, and it's done as if it was a single continuous shot, hence the kind of title.
Oh, wow.
And it's really, really cool. If you've seen the first film, you'll see that they do it really, really well. And it's obviously woven together from individual takes because the
Right.
level of the action, the fights, the gunplay, all of that stuff would be impossible to do in a genuine single take. But, it looks beautiful and it's really exciting. So that's really cool. That comes out on the 12th. And then later in the month, we've got this movie Control coming out, which is this independent thriller in which I play the British Prime Minister. And that's got Kevin Spacey, who plays the villain, if you like. It's a bit of an update or a new version of the movie Phone Booth. I don't know if you remember Phone Booth. It's a
Oh, yeah.
Colin
Love
Farrell.
phone
Yeah,
booth.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great movie. And so this movie kind of updates that. So instead of a phone booth, it's a self-driving car. And we find the heroine, who's the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom. She's in this car, and it gets kind of locked down, and control gets taken away by this unseen assailant, which is played by Kevin Spacey. So you just hear Kevin's voice. He's got that kind of sinister edge to him that if you remember back to films like Seven, it was really kind of
Yeah.
really brought a kind of depth and edginess to it. And he plays the villain in that piece. And so those three films are coming out quite early on in the new year. And then later in the year, I've got an independent feature that I recently directed, which I'm working on post production at the moment. I'm hoping that will come out in the UK at least in the next kind of few months, 4 or 5 months. And then I've got another movie I wrote called Five Cars, which is a heist movie, which we are hoping will go into production kind of more towards the summer. So there's a whole bunch of stuff coming up. And not only that, but we have the writer strikes and the actor strikes have all come to an end. So we're hoping that the gates will open in terms of getting back to business as usual as an actor, right? Because it's been a very
Right.
difficult period.
And going back to that updated phone booth movie you mentioned, how was it like playing the prime minister in that? Because that has to be quite an elevated role to portray in such a film.
Absolutely, and I think that I approached it from an angle of trying to work out like who is this guy. He's very much a modern British Prime Minister in that he is a guy who has come up through the ranks of industry, and he's a kind of corporate stooge. He's a guy who has come from a background of investment banking, and this is the kind of background they are created for him because the ethos of this prime minister character is that he wants to share everyone's data. He wants to become big business. He wants to help line the pockets of his friends in the city. And that plays into the overall narrative around the fact that this self-driving car has been able to be commandeered by Kevin Spacey's character is all down to this whole data sharing thing. So it kind of plays a direct sort of influential role in what happens in the movie. The way that I kind of created the character was, I kind of imagined a guy with a kind of Tony Blair charisma, but with a kind of Rishi Sunak kind of ethics. He's very, our current prime minister in the UK here is, he's very much on the side of the city, and you can see it through his actions that's what he really cares about is that and enriching his city mates, and that's kind of where I pitched this character. I thought it was quite a believable place to put it.
Right, and that movie has to be well in the times of now, right? Because it seems like a lot of people have self-controlled cars. And one of my biggest fears, I don't know if you have this too, is like, well, what if they get hacked at one point of time too?
Right. Yeah, and I think I don't have a Tesla myself. So we use a Tesla in the film, but you can remotely unlock your car from your phone, and it's like, okay, well, let's just hope the security is good enough that someone else doesn't just kind of hack into my phone and use that to drive off in my car, because you don't even need a key anymore. In you go. So yeah, I think security and safety is becoming, we're becoming more and more aware of it as a potential threat to our ownership of goods and things, but also our general safety with things like self-driving cars on the road. We have to be able to trust that those vehicles are safe and that they're going to stop if they see an obstacle, or they're going to see a pedestrian, or or whatever. And it's a big ask for us as people who are used to being, have our own free will, having our hands on the wheel of a driving a car. Is a big ask to take the wheel off and just expect the car to do all the
Right.
work.
And so how is it like juggling all these hyphenates with your career, right? You're an actor, you're a writer, and you're a director. So how is it like just juggling all of those things together with your projects?
I think that it's really about just making the time for the thing that you're prioritizing, the thing that you want to do, and then making time for it. So primarily, I'm an actor. So if an acting job comes along and they want me for these amount of days on this particular job, then I'll always make myself available for that, unless I happen to be actually shooting something of my own, in which case, I'll have to block out that time. My priority is always to try and get myself onto as many sets as possible, play as many different roles as possible. I like, a sort of variety. I've kind of established myself as a bit of a character actor who plays figures of authority. So, for example, CIA agents in like One More Shot, or fighter pilots, or I play lawyers, doctors, surgeons. That kind of thing tends to be the roles that I tend to lean into quite heavily. And you put me in a suit and give me an American accent, and you'll do pretty well as a filmmaker. You get a pretty good thing out of me. So, I'm always looking to expand on my kind of resume as an actor. And every set that you work on, I learned something because I work with a new director, and the new director has their own style of working, or a new director of photography. And it's a great way for me to learn as a filmmaker by observing others doing the job as well. So, I kind of get the best of all worlds. And then I have to make everything kind of fit in and around that. My day-to-day job is really, at the moment I'm editing my feature. That's what I do in the mornings, and that's what I do in my free time. And then if I have castings, auditions, or meetings I have to go to, then they become the priority, and I just make time for them. It's really about making sure that you're making the best use of all the time that you have. I have kids, and I have, all sorts of other responsibilities going on. So it's really about making sure that I'm making the most of all the time that I have.
Right. And how did you get involved with acting to begin with? Like, did you go to acting school, or was it just kind of something that hit you that you always wanted to do it? Or how did you get involved with acting?
It really came from filmmaking. So I was a kid who had a clunky, huge VHS camcorder when, my dad bought one of these when I was very young, and I started kind of lugging this thing around and filming stuff with it. And when we moved from New Zealand to the UK, where I was born, I moved to the UK and met a few friends over on this side of the pond, and we started enjoying kind of making films together. We'd meet after school and go and make our home movie version of Predator, or a home movie version of The Untouchables, or something like that. And so we had a great time doing that. And then the process of making those meant that we're always handing the camera to someone else to go, okay, well, we need you to play this character. You need to play Elliot Ness, or you need to play Arnie, or whatever. And so you end up performing in front of the camera for some of the scenes. And I just kind of got the acting bug from that. And so for me, the whole process of making a movie, has always been very, very intertwined. Whether it's directing or whether it's acting, they've always been very closely linked for me. And I'm hugely passionate about, cinema in general. And I just love the whole process.
Right. And how was it like working with Kevin Hart on Lift as well?
Well, I never worked character, which was a lot of fun. I did get to hang out with Billy Magnuson, which is great. I'm a big Bond fan, so to meet Billy was really cool. Kevin had done his stuff and gone by the time I arrived on the set. But we had a great few days playing a fighter pilot. Had a huge mock-up of a F-35 Raptor fighter jet. I had all the gear, the helmet, the visor, the mask. And to be honest, by the time you see me, it could be anybody behind all that gear. It's
Right.
so much stuff. But it was great fun. And as a huge fan of, Top Gun, it was great to get to play a fighter pilot for a few days and just kind of get into the cockpit and get into that kind of zone of, like, I could hear Danger Zone playing in my head when we were doing it. It was really fun.
Right. And that's all you need, hear it in your head when you're being a fighter pilot like that.
Right.
So when you're a director as well, and also an actor, what directors that you worked with really stood out to you and was like, wow, I can't believe, like, that was an amazing shot they picked up, or how they handled that sequence was just amazing, and what really stood out to you when working with other directors that could have possibly influenced your directing now?
I think what's interesting is that I like seeing how directors work with actors, because I am an actor, obviously, and it's interesting to sort of be on the receiving end, and you kind of get Some of it's good, some of it's not so good. Some of it's like, oh man, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that. Or sometimes it's I'm definitely not going to do that because that was a really uncomfortable moment for me as an actor. So you take away things that can really inform you. I think sometimes it is surprising. It's always surprising when you see the end product versus what you did on set, because you, as an actor, you don't get an eye through the lens. Sometimes you you might get to look at the monitor and see what the shots are and whether it's a close up or a mid shot, but you never see the kind of assembled final piece. Sometimes, I've had movies where I've ended up entirely on the cutting room floor, and I've ended up not in the movie at all. So I did World War Z a few years ago, the Brad Pitt movie, and there was a scene that I was in, and I could hear my voice on the soundtrack. I was playing a US military guy, as is my thing, and I could hear my voice on the soundtrack, and I was like, right, they're going to cut to me any second, but they never did, and I was like, oh, so yeah, sometimes the edit goes your way, and sometimes it doesn't. So that was an occasion where it really didn't go my way. But it was interesting to know that, like, all right, well, they felt that, I could hear my voice, and they felt that added something to the scene, and they put it in even if they didn't ever use my shot in the movie. But I did work, I worked earlier this year with James Nunn, who was the guy who directed One More Shot, and seeing him craft this movie into a single continuous shot from the various individual setups, that's really interesting to see the way that they kind of put that together and make it feel like it's one continuous take. That's a real kind of skill, because you don't get the chance to cover a scene in the traditional way. You don't get to do a shot and a reverse shot. You only have one angle, and it has to be moving in a way that captures all of the action and all of the narrative. And so that's quite a strict discipline. So to see that in action and to be able to observe that happening as from James as a director was really exciting.
Right. And as a screenwriter, how do you start with writing a screenplay? Do you start with the storyboarding, or just kind of from the end of the movie, from the beginning, from the middle? How do you go about from creating a screenplay when you write it?
I do what a lot of screenwriters do, which is to use a kind of beat board. So I basically will outline every aspect of the story, and I will put the beats on the board as I come up with them. And so I might just have a vague idea of a moment or a thing that happens that leads to a change in a character, and it might not yet have a full structure. But by the time you put the cards on the board, in fact, there's one right behind me. This is for the indie feature I made. By the time you've filled that out, you know that you've got every scene in the movie. Because the worst thing I find you can do as a screenwriter, and the Coen brothers would disagree because this is not how they do it, but is to start writing a screenplay when you've got an idea. Because what will happen is you'll run out of ideas very quickly, and you won't have the structure to be able to continue to get to the next good idea you've got. You're like, oh, I've got this bit that happens in the second act, but I can't get there because I don't know what happens in between. So for me, doing the structure is absolutely vital before I do anything in final draft. I have to make sure I know how it begins, what the process in terms of narrative is, how the characters drive that narrative, and how they drive it through to its eventual kind of conclusion, if you like. So yeah, I'm a real structure person, and it doesn't mean it can't change once you've done that first draft. Writing is rewriting, but I think that for me it starts with outlining what those beats are and just really understanding where the story's going before I even try and write, fade in.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us at Infamous Horror today. It's been so fun, and congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's been really cool to be here. I'd love to come back and talk to you again when we have some more stuff to talk about in the new year.
Oh, absolutely. I would love to.